Okay, everyone, let's grab our seats. It's officially 8:30 p.m. My name's Ron. I'm an alcoholic. How you doing? Welcome home. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group. Real quick, we got a couple announcements. This group has an ongoing commitment at a treatment center every Sunday night. We need 2-3 speakers every week. If you're interested in that, see me after the meeting. And I had the opportunity to visit a family member of mine today up in the treatment center in Lancaster. It's called Adult Teen Challenge. And if you ever want to be of service and donate anything, we are collecting toiletries. They have not only like a couple hundred men, but like another large percentage of women up there. And they need everyday stuff, clothes. So if you have some threads you haven't worn in a while, throw them together. We'll drop them off and donate them. It goes to a worthy cause. They're out in the street picking up people. And it's amazing to see that in person, and that's what this group's about. It's all about giving back. It ain't about getting anything, really, to tell you the truth. And we've been blessed with a lot of resources, and we pay it forward. And hopefully, we just ordered another 500 big books, and we've given away over 600 in the last couple of years. And it's all with your guys' support behind us and your donations and contributions that keep this going and be able to carry this message to the sick and suffering. With that, okay, this brings us to one of the best parts of the meeting. We've got the world's greatest chairman all the way in from Australia. Please welcome Brian.
What's going on, mates? Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brian, and I am an alcoholic. This is a 1-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday right here at St. Paul's Lutheran Church. That's 301 North Main Street in Doylestown, PA. The food and the fellowship for this group starts at 8 o'clock, and the speaker comes on at 8:30. We have a business meeting for this group that meets every Saturday, 7 p.m. to 7:30. Feel free to come early and join us. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God reliance and service to others through the practice and teachings of the 12 steps. We record all speakers so that others can benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We'd like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. If there's anyone that is new at this meeting for the first time or visiting from out of town that would like to introduce yourselves on a first-name basis so we can welcome you. Yeah?
Paul, I'm an alcoholic.
Paul. Welcome. Yeah.
Mike, I'm an alcoholic.
Mike. Welcome. That's it? We get everybody? Cool. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with a working knowledge of the 12 steps and who is willing to sponsor, please raise your hands. So there we go. We got a bunch of people willing to sponsor here. If you are new, grab one of those people after the meeting. There's always a meeting after the meeting. We'll be hanging out here. We'd love to talk with you. Are there any announcements from the floor for the good of AA? Nope, nobody has anything. Okay, a couple quick announcements for this group. This group has a sister group, which is a big book study meeting. It meets every Thursday, 7:30 at Salem UCC Church, right up the road there. It's 186 East Court Street in Doylestown, PA. The coffee for that meeting is on at 6:15, so again, feel free to show up early and join us. We do have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purchase of big books and CDs to help those who cannot afford them can put their donations in that jar on the back table marked Big Book and CD Donations. All CDs are available free of charge. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown. We'll put all the speakers from this meeting on there. We also put speakers on there from a meeting we have on Monday, 6 p.m., right in the room right next to here. It's a speaker step discussion meeting. This group also has a Facebook page. It's a good resource to have. We post upcoming speakers and events we might have going on for this group. Other groups will post anniversaries, celebrations, happenings they have going on. So it's a good resource to have to stay tied in with happenings throughout AA in the area. And with that, I believe Will is going to come up here. He's going to read our Just for Today Prayer of Recovery. Will.
I am Will and I'm an alcoholic. Just for today, I will be agreeable. I will look as well as I can, dress becoming, talk low, act courteously, criticize not one bit. not find fault with anything, and not try to improve or regulate anyone except myself. Now I have Mandy to come up and read the preamble.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Mandy, and I'm an alcoholic. And the preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and to help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. And with that being said, let me introduce JJ up here to tell us the 12 steps.
My name's JJ, I'm an alcoholic. These are the AA 12 steps of recovery. First, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Second, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Third, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Fourth, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. And with that, Brian's going to come back up and introduce our speaker.
Okay, this group does have a 7th tradition. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, we'll see that the basket makes its way around. Of course, there are no dues or fees for AA membership, but we do have expenses, and your contributions do help us to cover the cost of food, rent, big books, workshops, etc., so we do appreciate it. There's absolutely no smoking on the church property. We have a good working relationship with the church. It's really all they ask is that we keep the premise clean, so just be considerate of that as you're coming and going from the meeting. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting to avoid distractions. And now to introduce our speaker for tonight, a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group on loan to us from the Working with Others group of New Jersey. Please help me welcome Frank B.
Good evening. My name is Frank Black. I'm an alcoholic. It's only by the grace of God, 12 steps, 12 traditions, strong sponsorship, active participation in a home group much like this one. I haven't found it necessary to pick up a drink since February the 3rd of 2019, and for that I'm truly grateful. Most days I try to be grateful. Today I truly am. You know, I was talking to Ron before the meeting that there's something about this group and this podium that reminds me a lot like mine. You know, Clancy talked about pockets of enthusiasm in Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is one of them. You know, people literally show up and suit up, and that's what my group does. You know, when Ron asked me, can you put a jacket and tie on, for me, that's a must. My sponsor gave me some short demands when I asked him to be my sponsor, and one of them was out of respect for Alcoholics Anonymous and out of respect for the podium to wear a jacket and tie anytime I come represent Alcoholics Anonymous. And I do that willingly, you know, just like the men and women here dress up on Saturday nights. They do that willingly. And some people might ask, well, what's the point of that? What does that have to do with sobriety? And the truth of the matter is, it's got nothing to do with sobriety if you're not asked to do it. If you're asked to do it, it has everything to do with sobriety. Because if I'm not willing to put this jacket and tie on when I'm asked to, what's the next thing in my sobriety that I'm not willing to do? There's some things going forward with the steps that my sponsor's going to ask me to do, like build this relationship with a God of my own understanding. Things that he can't actually see if I'm doing it or not, So there has to be that little line of faith. So there's some things that I'm asked to do, and this is one of them. And for me, it's a powerful thing. So when I first came up to this group about 2 years ago, and saw the guys were doing the deal like I do the deal, it's a soft spot in my heart for that level of enthusiasm, that pocket of enthusiasm Clancy talked about. And I'm honored to be asked to come speak at this podium, to come speak anywhere on Alcoholics Anonymous. My grand sponsor says that good, bad, or indifferent, I'm an example that Alcoholics Anonymous works. My program might not be your program, and it doesn't have to be. The reality is we're all just reliving that experience that Ebby brought Bill at that kitchen table. We're all just trying to pass that message and do the best deal we can, and somehow, somewhere along the way, build a relationship with the power of God of my understanding. And that's those three things I say, that relationship with God, the steps and traditions that brought me to that relationship, and strong sponsorship. I'm grateful for those things. And gratitude is not something I had when I walked in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous on February the 3rd of 2019. I will be the first to admit that I did not want to be here. I had release papers in my back pocket. I was angry. I could have told you why I was in the situation I was in. I was able to take everybody's inventory but my own, and I was a pissed off kid. To stand here today and have an ounce of gratitude, to me, that's the miracle of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm not the miracle at all. What I am is just, somebody that was dumb enough to take some suggestions and do some work that I didn't necessarily believe in. And the results are, like they say, beyond my wildest dreams. It doesn't mean, grandiose. It doesn't mean I'm rich. It doesn't mean I'm famous. But it's definitely beyond my wildest dreams, because that first meeting I walked into or came back to, I'm not a first-time winner in Alcoholics Anonymous, but that first meeting I walked back into, I didn't think I'd be standing where I am today. The truth of the matter is I didn't want to be standing where I was today. I had some neat ideas and some preconceived notions that I thought I could just, work some things in my favor to be able to go out and safely drink alcohol again. And, my sponsor always says, if you're new and you have a plan, find someone that's got some time and tell them your plan, and don't be upset when they laugh at you. What happened was I told him my plan, and he gave me a new one. I started to follow that direction. But I'll step back a little bit, and talk about what I was like, what I was like, what happened, and what it's like now. That thing that uniquely qualifies me to be an alcoholic that's not unique. The irony there, I was raised with a small understanding of what alcoholism was. I knew that I had a father that was an alcoholic. I knew that I had a grandfather that was an alcoholic, two grandfathers that were. And I knew these things not because they professed themselves to me. I knew these things because I was told by others. I did not see my father drink for most of my life. He did drink again, and he's been sober for quite some time now. But I grew up knowing that Dad was an alcoholic, and that's why Dad didn't drink anymore. And when I asked, well, what makes him an alcoholic? It's, well, Dad gets nasty when he drinks. So that was like that one check in the box. As long as I don't get nasty, I can't be an alcoholic. Because I had this mother that she drank too, and she got happy, giddy, and laughed and sang, and was the life of the party, and she drank a copious amount, but apparently that isn't an alcoholic because people seem to like her, but people didn't like Dad when he drank, so he's an alcoholic. And then my grandfather was an alcoholic who he passed away with over 30 some years of sobriety. A man that I looked up to, and he was able to stop drinking on his own. And when I was younger, I wanted to know, well, what made him an alcoholic? And well, he did some silly things, is basically how it was explained to me. There was more details the older I got, but that's how it was explained to me at a young age. And I said, okay, well, as long as I don't do silly things and I don't, act rude to people, then I'm not an alcoholic. And then I had a grandfather that passed away before I was even born. And that was explained to me that he was an alcoholic because he passed away. It's like, okay, so don't be mean. don't be silly, and stay alive. I'm not an alcoholic. Like, that was my qualifications, you know. So I was warned, you know, just like, you know, Bill's story, I was, you know, told by others, but I didn't heed the caution, you know. And I don't know exactly how old I was when I had my first drink. It was my sister's graduation party. And I have a cousin that's a bunch of years older than me, and her friends were there. And they kept sending me over to the keg to get them beer, and they'd tell me, like, yeah, take a couple sips before you come back. And I think they just thought it'd be fun to get, like, the young kid drunk. I was maybe 13, maybe 14, a little bit of a late bloomer in some circles, you know. And as I went, it was like 1 sip, 2 sip. It didn't taste that good, but it happened like it talks about in the doctor's opinion. You know, that feeling of ease and comfort came over me, you know, as I was drinking that alcohol. And every time I went and refilled their glasses, I started drinking more, to where it was a half a cup to a full cup, and I'm tripping over myself. And I'll preface this by, when I was a little kid, like, I wasn't this, you know, rambunctious punk. I wasn't, like, outgoing or energetic. Like, I was a loser. I was a mama's boy. Like, I liked going to church and stuff. I was, like, this really shy, introverted kid. I like, if you put me in a social setting such as that, like, graduation party, I wouldn't even talk to the family members I knew because I was scared of everybody. But what happened by, like, the 3rd or 4th trip of going to that keg and filling up those beers is the lights turned on. You know, I've heard it said in rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I believe my experience to be just like that. It's almost like the Wizard of Oz, when everything was black and white and then went to Technicolor. My world changed. I became a part of, you know, I fit in. That aunt that I didn't want to be near, I was able to talk to. Like, those aunts and uncles and those family friends that I'd always be shy. Like, you know, I start being a little, like, you know, out of my shell. That guitar that I'd hide away and play in my room, I brought down and wanted to be the center of attention all of a sudden. Like, this cataclysmic change just happened all of a sudden. The thing is, like, I still hung out with good kids, and I remember that was like a Saturday party or something. Like, that next day or 2 days later, I'm riding bikes with one of my buddies, and he called me some rude things because I drank alcohol, because I hung out with all these straight-laced kids, and you know, we were pretty straight edge, and that worked. You know, I guess what happened was I didn't cross that line yet, but I was able to listen for some reason. And what happened was a few years went by until that same group of friends, they started to experiment too. You know, and by 17 years old, I find myself at another party, and what happens is I know I shouldn't drink, you know, but I do. I kind of remember what happened, and I started to think about it, and it seemed like a pretty good chance to take. You know, I didn't care about the friends. I didn't care about the girl I was dating that was straight edge and didn't want me to. What I cared about was that feeling that I could be a part of, because there's, you know, 50 people at this house party, and I'm feeling pretty shy. And if I have a few drinks, I'll feel all right. And so I started to drink at that party, and I remember sitting there, and there's this girl, Vicky, sitting next to me, and she said, the trick is you drink until your gums go numb, and that's when you know you're drunk. And she's like, are your gums numb yet? And I was like, my gums were numb 10 drinks ago. I'm like, not yet. You know, like already lacking the honesty, and just because I chase that feeling. I chase what alcohol does to me, because what it does to me is it stills the madness. I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. And at 17 years old, once again, I start to realize that alcohol can be a solution, and alcohol is the solution. You know, there's a lot of people that speak from podiums of Alcoholics Anonymous like alcohol is the problem. That's not my experience. I love alcohol, and alcohol works every time I drink it. Alcohol works without fail. I can be having the worst day, the best day, a mediocre day, and you give me 2 shots of Jim Beam, and I can I can breathe. All those worldly clamors, like, they don't matter anymore. I feel relaxed. I feel invincible. I feel like I'm somebody accomplishing something, you know. The problem is I don't have an off button. You know, a lot of people drink, you know. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effects produced by alcohol. You know, even in the doctor's opinion, he says that we have an abnormal reaction to it. He doesn't say we have a bad reaction. He says we have an abnormal reaction, you know. When I start to drink, I can't stop drinking. And what happens is some things begin to take place in life. You know, I always thought they were first step problems. I always thought the first step, that powerless over alcohol, was like, you know, the damage that alcohol causes. You know, so some things started to happen, you know. Didn't really, you know, make it through high school all that well. I like skated by the skin of my teeth. Lost some relationships, lost some friends. You know, there was some havoc that came from the consumption of alcohol. But for what alcohol did to me, they were prices I was willing to pay. I was willing to throw away that friendship. I was willing to get rid of that hiking buddy or get rid of that girlfriend or not pass that, you know, first period math class. I was fine with like upsetting my parents a little bit and not getting the grades they wanted. I was okay with not going away to college right when I graduated high school. I was okay with not amounting to much because the effects produced by alcohol made all those things okay. You know, talks about in the big book when it goes through all the things, you know, you think they'd stop for her, she's such a sweet girl, you think they'd stop for, the doctor told them that if they drink they're gonna die, and there he is all lit up again. I get that kind of drinking, you know, because when I have bad news, when I'm faced with some problems in front of me or some rocky road, like, alcohol smooths it out every time. You know, and I was about 22 years old, maybe 23 years old, and what's happening is everything is just coming down around me quicker than I can build it back up. You know, because alcoholics are pretty good at building things back up, but everything's falling down around me. I got a wife that's about to be an ex-wife. I got a girlfriend that doesn't want to talk to me anymore. I got an apartment I can't go to. I'm sleeping on a hardwood floor because I can't afford a bed, you know, and life's starting to look pretty crappy. You know, so what happens is I find myself at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. You know, I find myself at a clubhouse over in New Jersey, and I like to say that I didn't receive the message, but the truth of the matter is what I received is the message they had to offer me. But for me, I'm what the book talks about, the alcoholic of the hopeless variety. And, you know, the reality is I can't stay sober off slogans, and I can't stay sober off, you know, not drinking and going to meetings, and that's what was presented to me. I went to these meetings and people said the fun little things we say, like, don't drink, it gets better. Just put the plug in the jug, take the cotton out of your ears and stick it in your mouth. And I didn't know what any of that meant, so I kept attending these meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, and what was happening was I was as physically sober then as I am today. But what happens to a guy like me when you remove the only solution that is alcohol and don't replace it with a solution of God? I went crazy, stark raving mad. I put about a year sober, maybe a little longer, and for about 9 months, just out of gut-wrenching fear, I wouldn't answer my mother's phone calls. I couldn't look my father in the eyes. You know, but my family thought that I was actually doing worse, you know, that I was going down a deeper hole in this so-called sobriety, but I kept being told to keep coming till the miracle happens, and I just kept going crazier. And what happened was I was convincing myself that I was suffering from something other than alcoholism. I'd be driving home from work, and I'd be seeing 18-wheelers come the other way and think that if I just pulled in front of them, that it would stop the madness. Because drinking wasn't a choice. Don't drink no matter what. And that's what I was doing until, again, I'll mention Clancy. Clancy talks about this spring that we have inside of us. And then every night someone comes over and they just tighten it a little more and a little more. And that spring just got so tight and got so tight. And here I am a little over a year sober. And on the outside, life seems to be doing good, but just that in my chest, that anxiety, that fear, that self-pity, just the bewilderment, terror, like the horseman it talks about in the book, like all these things are coming to reality. And I just remember just driving home, and I got done with work a little earlier. I was working in restaurants at the time, which worked out beautifully because, I would leave by the time the liquor stores closed. But that night I got out a little early, and those neon lights were still on. And I was going crazy, and I thought I was mad, and I thought I was insane, and I pulled in, and I picked up a 6-pack of beer and a small bottle of Jim Beam, and what happened was I went home, and it worked exceptionally well. And for any alcoholic that drinks again, the worst thing could have happened, which is nothing. I put the alcohol on my lips, it stilled the madness once again, and everything was okay. And I was living with my father at the time, and what I was doing was I was driving around the places and picking up, liquor when I could, and beer, and keeping the beer warm behind my lazy boy in my room, because here's a man he's trying not to drink, and in the beginning I actually cared. I actually cared about another human being, and I tried to hide that I was drinking again. But it got out of hand. But it got out of hand to where it was still tolerable. In that relapse that lasted 5 years, I built some things up. I built a resume. I met a girl that I get to call my wife today. We bought a house. We adopted a dog. I changed jobs. Like, things happened. So that looking in from the outside, life seemed to be okay. You couldn't tell me I was a problem. There was times, that we had fights, and there was times where the fecal matter hit the spherical blades, and again, it just didn't seem like the havoc was enough for what the solution alcohol produced. I remember going on one of those prodigious benders, and my wife left me a big book that I had from that first time I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, and she left it on my dresser, and I thought that was the most ridiculous statement a human being could ever do to another human being. Like, leave me, don't leave me that. And I took that big book and I threw that in the garbage, and she was smart enough, and she's not in Al-Anon, she's not in 12 steps, but she knew enough, and for me that could be, for her, divine intervention, for me divine inconvenience. She pulled that big book out of the garbage can and she saved it. And when I came back in this time, that's the big book I got to take the 12 steps through. And I still have that book because it means the world to me, because it saved my life. But they were the kind of experiences we had, and we bought this house, and things went well for a time, and I couldn't even see the insanity. I couldn't see the insanity until coming in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and telling the insanity to a sponsor, and him, picking it out for me. The craziness of alcoholism. If you asked me, was I hurting anybody else, I'd tell you no. And one of those stories that I can remember is there was one night that I like many nights that I was just drinking out of control, but for whatever reason I had enough liquor in the house the next morning, and it was early in the morning, and I woke up and I start to go over to this bottle of Jim Beam, and I go to pour it, and my wife just gets on her knees and is crying and begging me not to drink. And the insanity of alcoholism is I look at her and just go, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, why do you act like this? Why do you act like this when all I want to have is a good time? I can't see that that my decisions, that my decisions based on self are literally killing another human being, just destroying them, because I just can't. When I'm in the grips of alcoholism, I'm an unlovely creature. You know, I can think the year my mother was diagnosed with cancer, that Thanksgiving I told my mom that I'd show up early and help. And I'd show up and I'd help her because I had experience in kitchens and all that. And I said, listen, you know, I'll make life easy for you. I remember hearing this when I first came in, and it's those the mornings that you put an alcoholic on a lie detector test and they'd pass it. And when I was talking to my mother that day, I would have passed the lie detector test, that I truly meant that I was going to show up to her house Thanksgiving morning early and do everything for her. But what happened was I showed up late. You know, I showed up late. I showed up half drunk, and what I did was I was not a help. I was a hindrance. I consumed all the alcohol that I could. I raided her liquor cabinet. I made a fool of myself. I disrespected her home. And when I left, more like when she wanted me to leave, I asked her if I could have one of her Percocets because my wrist was hurting. You know, like that's the son I became. But the truth of the matter is I loved my mother. And that's not the son I wanted to be, but that's where alcohol brought me, and I couldn't see it. You know, for me, there's no level of bottoms that I hit. You know, you hear bottoms in Alcoholics Anonymous all the time, and in the book it talks about a jumping off place, and I wasn't there yet. I drank through so many bottoms, you know. When I look back on that today, it's painful and it's clear to see, but when you're living in it like that insanity just seems normal, and it seems acceptable, and it seems okay, and I would swear up and down that I never hurt a single soul, but I'm sure I put a lot of worry into my mother. You know, it's the things we do to family along the way, the things we do to loved ones the most, because they tolerate us, you know. It's I always tell guys when I'm taking them through their 4-step and setting them up, and we're going through their 5th step, like all the things we take from our family and our loved ones are all the things that we get back through sobriety. That peace, serenity, happiness, joy. They're all the things I take from everybody else when I'm out there, you know. And just more things like that started to hit the head. Just the world was coming down and crumbling all around me, but I wasn't done yet. You know, I was truly ready to self-implode. And what happened was, I did not get sober because I wanted to get sober. I didn't want it for me. I didn't want it at all. What happened was, January 31st, some things transpired where there was an altercation, and the police showed up at my house, and I always say, like, when I came in, I did not have a white light experience. The New Jersey State Police are very good at giving a red and blue light experience, and they did for me what I could not. They came to my house, and by the time they got there, I was calm and all that, but that, you know, that beautiful ego stepped in, and I from what I don't remember much of that night, but what I do remember is I believe they were about ready to go, and my ego stepped in, and I said, "Now get out of my house," and they did, with me in handcuffs, and they and I spent the night in jail, and what happened was It's not the first time I had repercussions, but it was the first time that I found myself at that spot that it talks about in the book, where I was at this jumping off place. Because for the first time I was being forced to remain sober. I had no intentions of being sober that morning. I actually planned on going to the liquor store, getting drunk that day, and cleaning my truck, and then watching the Super Bowl that Sunday, you know. But what happened was the police intervened, and the state of New Jersey had some better ideas, and they caused me to stay sober long enough where I could have that reflection moment, that moment of solitude and that moment of surrender where I realized I was at the jumping off place, because I couldn't imagine a life with alcohol anymore. The damage was getting too much, but the scary thing is I couldn't imagine a life without alcohol, because up until that point, what was happening was I was coming home on a daily basis and picking up enough alcohol to stop the tremors from happening, and I'd sit at my coffee table, on my couch, on my coffee table, and I would stare at this bottle of Jim Beam, hating myself, knowing that no matter how much I wanted to or how much I didn't want to, I had to consume that alcohol. I had to drink, or the madness was going to continue, and so there I am sitting in a jail cell, and I'm just at that jumping off place. But the truth of the matter is I wasn't even happy about it. And I don't know if anybody here has had the pleasure of going to jail, but they give you these sheets of paper that you write down some numbers that you want to be able to contact. And I am not one for remembering numbers, because we have cell phones now. So the only number that I remember is my wife, who I'm not legally allowed to talk to, and my mother, who's dying of cancer. And that spring is tightening. That gut-wrenching just pain is there, because the only person I can call for help is someone that's dying, and I get to tell her, look what your son's become. Luckily, though, I was released, and I was able to get my phone back, and I called my father, and I don't know why I called my father. There was people I could have called. I could have called a buddy. I could have called, drinking friends. There's other people that would have co-signed every ounce of crap that I had walking out of that jail. But I called my father, and the thing about that is there was 3 things my father told me to never do. One was buy a motorcycle, which I did at 21 years old. The second was to ever get tattoos. I am covered underneath this suit. And the third was to call him from jail. And I'm like, 2 out of 3, baby. Let's see if he picks up. And he did. And I think I needed that. My buddy Matt always tells a story about him and his father crossing over Frenchtown Bridge, and his father saying something at the exact right moment that if it was a minute before or a minute after, it wouldn't have hit the way it did. And I believe that to be true in a lot of instances in Alcoholics Anonymous. I believe this is a program of inches and seconds. And what happened was my father picked me up that day, and he looked at me with only the disappointed look a father can give a son. And he looked at me and he said, "Don't you think you're done?" And the reality is, in that moment, I didn't want to be done. And in the reality of that moment, I don't have the same perspective I do today about it. And in that exact moment, I wanted to kill my father. How dare you say something like that to me? Don't you know who I am? The great I am. But the reality is I was, And I went back to my father's house, and there was still some boxes there that we didn't take when we moved, and I found that big book. I found that big book that she kept from the trash that day. And it was Saturday, it was late. The next day I woke up, which was February 3rd, and I went to the clubhouse for a 4 o'clock open discussion meeting. And the day I walked into AA is the day I count as my sober date, not the day I quit, that I had my last drink, but the day I actually walked into my first meeting. And what happened was, if you told me that day, as I was walking into that clubhouse, that I was about to have a spiritual experience of the educational variety, the ones that talks about in the appendix in the back of the book, God never came down to me. He never spoke to me. My sponsor tells me if I see a burning bush, grab a fire hose. It's not for you. What happened was I had a spiritual experience of the educational variety. It's something that I can realize today was God intervening, but at that time, if you told me that, I probably would have hit you. I thought I was tough. I thought I was ignorant. I was egotistical. And I walked in that clubhouse, and what happened was something came over me that I didn't expect to come over me. As they went around the room and they introduced themselves, I raised my hand. I said, "I'm Frank, I'm an alcoholic. I think I need help. I think I need a sponsor." And what happened to me is God intervened again. And a man approached me and he offered me sponsorship. He says I asked him. I'm pretty sure he told me he was going to be my sponsor. It doesn't matter though. The more work I've done with this man, the more I've realized that God put this man in my life, because my story and his story are almost exactly the same. And thank God, because I needed that kind of structure. I mentioned earlier that meeting, he told me that there was going to be some, that AA was full of suggestions, but his line of sponsorship had some rules to it, and there were some things that I was going to do. And one was wear a jacket and tie when I spoke on behalf of AA. The second was that I was going to meet him at a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous once a week of his choice. And the third was that I was going to call him every day at 5 o'clock, and I agreed I could do that. And just like with everything else in sobriety, I've agreed and had opinions rattling in my brain that I don't say out loud to him. And I remember going home that night and calling my mother and talking about like how unreasonable this guy was. He's a big pain in the butt, all that. And she's like, "Well, maybe that's what you need." And I'm like, "Maybe it is." And so the next day was Monday, and it was like 4:45, and I'm like, I'm going to show this guy that I have some gumption. And I'm going to call him early. And I called him at 4:45, and he didn't answer. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm sitting on this twin-size bed and pissed off about life. And so I give it 5 minutes, and I call him at 4:50, and this guy doesn't answer again, and I am fuming. I'm like, all this big talk at the clubhouse. Oh, if you need me, I'm there for you. It's all about helping others and all this happy horse crap, and you don't even freaking answer your phone. And then 5 o'clock, he finally answers, and I'm like, oh, there you are. I've been calling. And he's like, how's your day going? And I did that for about 3 days, and went to that clubhouse, and he's sitting around with some of the other guys that he's sponsoring at these wire tables smoking cigarettes, and he explained to me in front of his other guys, where the big hand and where the little hand meet on the clock to be 5 o'clock. And why 10 minutes before is someone else's time, and why 10 minutes is after is someone else's time, and why the importance of calling at 5 o'clock like the time we agreed on is important. It might seem harsh, maybe it was, but I needed that. I needed to learn what accountability was. I didn't have accountability. I didn't hold myself accountable to anybody or anything. I was self-will run riot. So that calling at 5 o'clock it's important. It still is today. I call my sponsor every day at 5 o'clock unless he tells me not to, and he hasn't told me not to yet. I have an alarm set so I don't miss it because it's important, And what he did was he took me through the work of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he took me through the work rather quickly. Chris Raymer talks about triage, and that's exactly what I needed, because I'm an alcoholic. I'm destined to drink again. So he took me through the works of Alcoholics Anonymous. We went through the 12 steps as they're outlined in the book, line by line. And we spent some time on step 1 because I didn't even know what step 1 was. I remember him asking me what an alcoholic was. And I said, someone that drinks a lot. He's like, well, I breathe a lot. What's that make me? And he started to explain what an alcoholic was. See, I thought that unmanageability in step 1 was all those bad things that happen: the divorce, the soon-to-be potential divorce, the loss of money, the loss of jobs, the arrests, the despairing women and blameless children, all that. I thought that was the unmanageability in step 1, and he explained to me, no, it's not. That's not the unmanageability, that's just irresponsibility. When you drink the way you drink, irresponsible things start to happen. The unmanageability is that left to your own devices, left to your own thinking, your own self-will, your own self-knowledge, if you don't do steps 2 and 3, if you do not invite a God of your understanding into your life, you will drink again no matter how much you wish not to. that restless, irritable, and discontent will come back. And he took me through the doctor's opinion and started to show me what step one looked like. You know, step one, it's such an important step to grab, and that's why the doctor's opinion in the first 43 pages of the big book deal with step one. You know, my sponsor tells me that step one is designed to bend me over a barrel and put me into a state of submission that I have to do 2 and 3. And that's what happened. And we sat down and we went through this work, and he pointed out those things, and I started to see what alcoholism was. I started to see that allergy and the spiritual sickness and the malady, and I started to understand my condition and that, and I don't have this licked, and I never will. That it will get me every time if I allow it to. And it didn't make step 2 and 3 easy, but it made step 2 and 3 palatable. You know, when we got to step 3, I got down on my knees, and it talks about in the book that, you know, something might be felt at once, and I will stand from this podium and tell you that nothing happened. I got on my knees, I did my 3rd step prayer, and I remember walking out of the across the parking lot that day and thinking to myself that was a waste of time. I don't feel this presence of God. I don't feel anything. You know, but the great thing was my sponsor didn't ask me, do you feel something? My sponsor didn't ask me, are you ready to go take step 4 and 5? He just outlined how I was going to do step 4. And he told me what you're going to do is you're going to write and pray. And then you're going to make it to a meeting and see me at a meeting that night. And then you're going to write and pray until you can't write anymore. And then you're going to pray until you're able to start writing again. And that's exactly what I did. You know, and I wrote all this stuff out, and like it's outlined in the book. You know, I've seen people get scared of doing a step 4. For me, there was no fear behind step 4. I loved step 4. It talks about, you know, a grudge list. I can get down with a grudge list. The problem is I didn't realize the 4th column, or as my sponsor likes to say, where all sponsees get a stuttering problem, my part. And when I went through my step 5, we started to have these conversations. We started to see where I was playing this game, where I was trying to get by or get over on someone, where I was trying to wheel and deal and manipulate life the way I want to. You know, like it talks about in how it works before we do our 3rd step prayer, where I was trying to be the director, where I was producing, you know, confusion rather than harmony. And I start to get this blueprint in how I live my life. And how I treat others. And I start to get this blueprint on what I need to do to make things right. You know, and in 6 and 7, I get to take these things to God and ask him to remove these things. But still at that beginning phase, I didn't have the greatest relationship with God. I didn't have much of one at all. You know, but I prayed to the best of my ability. I remember I used to like pray and meditate when I was driving down 78 in the morning. And this is like, I would be driving down 78 at like 6 o'clock in the morning with no one on Route 78. And the ego in me would go, oh God, what if someone sees me right now? You know, like praying. As if they'd know, like as if I couldn't have been singing to the radio, or who the hell's looking in my car at 6 o'clock in the morning. But this relationship with God just seems so weird. You know, this relationship with God seems so like animated and unnatural, because it was. I'm an alcoholic that just lives on self-will. I don't invite God into my life. You know, but I was asked to start to, and I had no real belief and no real understanding, but all it's asking is that I start to. And so I give these things to the God of my very, very limited understanding, and we go through with the rest of the work. And I start to write out a list of these people that I harmed, and I get to go, you know, make amends to these people. And that was the scary thing, you know, having to face these people and for the first time have like an honest conversation about the wreckage that I was causing in my life. There was 3 questions that he'd have me ask when I did my amends. And the first question was there anything I left out, which for me is a problem because I'm a blackout drinker. So there was a lot of, you know, blanks filled in by different people. The second was, which is the strangest question I've ever been asked to ask, and how does that make you feel? Because up until that point I didn't care. I didn't care how I made other people feel, but I was asked to find out. and the third was, what can I do to make these things right? And I started off with the easy ones. I started off with the family and loved ones. And to me, step 9 is where the rubber meets the road. Like, to me, step 9 is where an alcoholic in Alcoholics Anonymous actually earns their seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's when you get to be a part of. And the first amends I made was on Mother's Day, a couple months after I got sober, and I made amends to my mother, who was dying of stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And I asked her to come early to my house that day, and I sat there and we talked. And we had an honest talk. And our relationship changed that moment. I did the 3 questions, and when I asked her, is there anything I can do to make it right, she told me, just keep doing what you're doing. And when I brought this back to my sponsor, all happy and giddy because I wasn't expected to do much more, he basically told me, you're wrong. You're going to do a lot more. You're going to call your mother every day and ask her how she's doing. And I did. I called my mother every day, and I used to leave early on the days after she had chemo because she'd be up from all the steroids. And so I'd wake up early and be able to have like an extra hour talking to my mother. And what happened with that is I had about 12 months left with my mother after that amends. And I had 12 months to build a pretty great relationship with a woman I admire. And I got to have honest conversations because my sponsor told me to shut my mouth and just listen. There was a lot of things my mom wanted to talk about that she couldn't talk about with other people, like dying, what the afterlife was going to be like, which for me is exactly what I needed, because here's a son that's struggling with the idea of God, and here's a woman that's about to meet him. And we got to have real conversations. And I remember the night my mother was at Sloan Kettering, and they told her that she only had a few hours left, and we were planning on how to get her home. What my mother did, a woman that didn't ask much of me because I wasn't much to ask of, she asked me to call my sister and give my sister the bad news because she didn't have the heart to do it. Because that relationship was mended too as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous and the things I've learned to do here. I couldn't get that if it wasn't for this. They're those things that I take absolutely no credit for. They're the things that I got because I took some suggestions that I didn't necessarily believe in, that I listened to a man that had real answers, no holier than thou attitude. When my mother passed away, I had 18 months sober. And we went to my sister's for the repass. And I was driving home. It was a Thursday, the night of my home group, and I'm driving home from that meeting. And I'm on my way, or I'm driving home from the repass, and I'm driving to that meeting. And what's happening is I'm excited to go connect to the men in my home group whose opinions mean so much to me. And whose like glue and fabric held me together through the most trivial point in my life, let alone in my sobriety to this date, And I'm driving down that same road that I talked about earlier, that I used to drive down and think about pulling in front of 18-wheelers and ending my life. And I realized at that moment that there was a God working in my life, that there was something bigger than me working in my life, and that carried me through, because that whole time my mother was on hospice and dying, I didn't make a lot of meetings. I didn't have a lot of contact. My sponsor told me what happened was I got down on my knees every day and I prayed to a God that I had no understanding of, and that God answered, because God makes it easy for those who seek him. And at that moment I had an in-your-face, God-shot spiritual experience, something more than just the educational variety. There was no denying it at that moment. And I remember calling my sponsor the next day and having that conversation with him, and I said, well, what do I do with this? And he goes, you do what you've been doing. You go out and you try to take this message to other alcoholics, because now you believe it. Now you see it. Now you know what it is. And that's what I get to do today. But by the grace of God, I'm lucky enough to to sponsor some guys, and I've sponsored a bunch, and they don't all stick around. But it's an honor and a privilege when I get to. Nothing so much ensures my immunity against that first drink like intensive work with other alcoholics. And I can tell you that every time that I've taken a guy through the third step prayer and I've gotten on my knees and prayed, unlike the first time I did it where I felt nothing, every time since then, I've felt the presence of God in the room. I feel the presence of God in every Alcoholics Anonymous meeting I go to. You know, but when I get down on my knees, there's chills that come over me. There's a sense of ease and comfort that comes over me that if I could bottle it and sell it to you, I would. And to me, that's that gift of sponsorship. And the reality is, I don't know if they feel that. If they're anything like me, they probably don't. You know, but I pray to God that people stick around until they get to. This program is outlined 12 steps, not necessarily to get me sober, but to open a channel to God that will allow me to stay sober and be sober. You know, and all this program is doing is asking me to be a seeker. And today there's a bunch of different ways I get to be a seeker. You know, I get to be an active participant in a home group that means the world to me. I get to be a sponsor. I get to take commitments. I get to, you know, come here and speak and go all over and try to help some people and share my experience, strength, and hope. And you know, I remember there was moments where I'd be going through those things, like the loss of my mom or everything, and my sponsor would tell me, you know, everything you go through will one day be able to help someone else. And I just nod my head and say yes, and I didn't think it was ever true. But the reality is I've had the privilege of sponsoring guys that have gone through exactly what I've gone through. You know, I'm not unique. You know, and I get the privilege of seeing people build a relationship with God of their own understanding. And to me, that's a neat deal. Tonight, I hope I brought you a typical message of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thanks.
My name's Nick, I'm an alcoholic, and welcome home, everyone. Let's give Frank a round of applause. That was excellent. Just a reminder, the Food and Fellowship always starts at 8 o'clock. You can always come early, help us set up, help us be part of this meeting. Server positions are available. Let's thank Mrs. K for tiresome work in the kitchen as always. It's customary to form a line and thank our speakers. They come here at their own time and expense. So we'll form a line in the front here and thank them on a singular level. If anybody's hurting out there and is struggling, please find somebody after the meeting, ask for help. And I heard a speaker once say, if you don't tell us where it hurts, how can we help you? So you got to let people know, expose the problem, talk about it. So if you care to join us, we have a beautiful way of closing. We'll circle up and close with the Lord's Prayer.